Mr. Speaker, this Labour government has failed the British public at every turn. But perhaps the most immediate and visible failure, one that poses an immediate and direct health risk to the people of Birmingham, is the appalling financial mismanagement of Labour-run Birmingham City Council. After more than a decade of Labour control, their incompetence has led to mountains of uncollected rubbish piling up on every street, so vast that it can be seen from satellites orbiting space. It is nothing short of a disgrace and a damning indictment of Labour's inability to govern. Will the Prime Minister take urgent action to protect the public health and the people of Birmingham by immediately deploying the...
Order. We're meant to...
Birmingham is in crisis. Piles of trash on the streets, collapsing services, and a city council that's flat out bankrupt. After years under Labour control, it's become a cautionary tale, proof of what happens when leadership is replaced with excuses. And in Parliament, that failure exploded into the spotlight. One independent MP stood up, not to debate, but to expose. With calm fury, he called out the rot. The chamber froze. Keir Starmer, usually composed and scripted, sat in silence. No defence, no spin, just a Prime Minister cornered by the truth. This wasn't a political jab, it was a reckoning. What was meant to be just another Prime Minister's questions turned into something far more brutal. Starmer arrived with his usual script, polished stats, vague reassurances, and that rehearsed calm. But none of it mattered, because that MP didn't hold back. He tore through the facade, hammering Starmer on broken promises, rising poverty, and a party that stopped listening to its people. The chamber shifted.
Okay. Prime Minister.
Well, I've said the situation in Birmingham Council is completely unacceptable, but he might want to tell his constituents that we've delivered 2 million extra appointments for the NHS, so waiting lists are coming down for his constituents. We've delivered the national living wage, a £1,400 increase, including for his constituents. We've got record investment into this country, growing the economy, including for his constituents.
Starmer tried to reply, but his voice was thin, his confidence cracked. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. He was exposed. The attack zeroed in on one of Labour's most painful failures, the WASPy women. Women who worked their entire lives expecting fair pensions, only to be blindsided by policy shifts that left them with nothing. And when they turned to Labour, they were ignored. The MP didn't just mention them, he made them impossible to forget. He spoke of skipped meals, freezing homes, and broken trust. While Labour found money for select groups, these women were left behind. It was personal, it was public, and it stung. Starmer had no answer, just vague talk about tough decisions, which only made things worse. Because this wasn't a financial debate, it was about dignity, and Labour, under Starmer, had abandoned it. Then came the knockout punch. Birmingham. Once a Labour stronghold, now a symbol of everything broken. The MP laid it bare. Years of arrogance and neglect had turned the city into a disaster zone. Trash stacked on every street. Essential services gutted. Local governance in freefall. And who was responsible? Labour. Starmer's party. You want to run a country? The MP asked. Try running a city first. The chamber reacted instantly. Some MPs shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded. Because the failure wasn't theoretical, it was visible. Starmer tried to explain, blaming historic issues, but the damage was done. The truth had already landed and everyone felt it. What followed next wasn't just criticism, it was an unravelling. The MP turned from local failures to a bigger question. Who does Keir Starmer really represent? Because it's no longer the working class, not the unions, not the grassroots members. Starmer's loyalty, the MP argued, lies elsewhere. He listed purged councillors, silenced activists, and policies quietly dropped the moment they threatened corporate interests. Rail, energy, water, once promised for public ownership, now handed back to the market. The Labour leader wasn't exposed as dishonest. He was revealed as calculated. Managing a brand, selling stability to donors, not hope to voters. And this time, the Labour benches stayed silent, not in protest, just stunned. The MP wasn't done. He started naming names. Party officials, donors, pressure groups, all tied to Labour's quiet shift away from principle and toward power. He spoke of insiders silencing dissent, of MPs banned from protesting, and of human rights ignored when inconvenient. One by one, the illusions fell. Starmer wasn't standing neutral, he was standing calculated. The MP painted a picture of a party transformed, not by vision, but by fear. Fear of donors, fear of backlash, fear of losing control. And in that moment, Starmer didn't look like a leader. He looked like a man caught playing both sides and losing both. Then the MP took it global. He turned to Gaza, to Rafah, to the dead children and shattered hospitals. And he asked the question no one else had. Where was Starmer when the bombs fell? Instead of defending human rights, the Labour leader had nodded along to the line that cutting off food and water was justified, not out of belief, but out of caution, out of fear of upsetting allies and funders. The MP called it what it was: cowardice disguised as diplomacy. And this wasn't just about one conflict. It was about a pattern of silence, of complicity, of refusing to lead when it truly mattered. The attack deepened as the MP exposed Labour's growing ties to corporate power. He listed the donors: private equity firms, arms manufacturers, lobbyists, people whose interests didn't align with ordinary voters but now shaped Labour's agenda. This wasn't speculation, he had the receipts, names, amounts, influence. Labour, he argued, was no longer a party of the people. It had become a product, marketed for approval, funded for silence, run like a business. And when it came to foreign policy, Ukraine, Yemen, Africa, the story stayed the same. Money flowed, voices stayed quiet. Starmer, the human rights lawyer, had become Starmer, the risk manager. Then came the moment that stunned even the opposition benches. The MP raised the case of Julian Assange, a journalist imprisoned for exposing war crimes, left to rot while Starmer, once head of public prosecutions, did nothing. In fact, he had helped pave the way for Assange's extradition. It was the ultimate contradiction. A man who claimed to fight for justice now stood accused of silencing it. And as the MP laid out the facts, it became clear. Starmer hadn't just walked away from Labour's ideals, he'd actively dismantled them. To protect power, to protect his rise. The MP then brought it back to Britain, to the streets people live on, not the headlines politicians chase. He spoke of councils collapsing like Birmingham, of social care stripped bare, youth centres shuttered, libraries gone, and families struggling just to stay afloat, all under Labour's watch. He contrasted the billions spent abroad with the silence at home. There was always money for war, he said, but never enough for nurses, pensioners or working families. And that silence? It wasn't an accident. It was policy. A calculated decision to ignore the suffering that couldn't be spun into a photo op. Then came the emotional core of the MP's message. The people. He painted a stark picture. A single mother juggling 3 jobs and still needing a food bank. A retired miner waiting months for care. A woman robbed of her pension after decades of work. This wasn't just about policy. It was about dignity. Ripped away by leaders who claimed to stand for the people but delivered only silence. He listed the numbers. Millions in poverty, children going hungry, hospitals overwhelmed. And as he turned to Starmer, the question wasn't political, it was moral. Where was the compassion? Where was the fight? The MP didn't just speak in emotion, he brought the receipts. He ran through a devastating list. Pledges to renationalise water, energy, Royal Mail, abandoned. Promises to raise the minimum wage, scrapped. Tuition fees, forgotten. Universal credit, still here. Every campaign vow stripped for parts the moment power became an option. It was more than backtracking. It was betrayal in plain sight. And then he returned to the waspy women. To Margaret, a 64-year-old widow who lost her home after believing in Labour. Her letter was raw. Her story, heartbreaking, and her silence, the result of a party that stopped listening. The MP brought it all together in one cutting line. Labour may wear red, but under Starmer, its soul had turned blue. He pointed to council records, slashed budgets, disappearing services, entire communities left behind by the very party meant to stand for them. Labour hadn't just failed to protect the vulnerable, it had chosen not to. This wasn't about spin or political theatre anymore. It was about survival. And the people who needed help the most had been treated as expendable. For them, Starmer's Labour didn't feel like a lifeline. It felt like a betrayal wrapped in branding. By now the chamber was boiling. Some applauded, others sat in stunned silence. But all eyes were on Starmer, and he had nothing to say. Not a rebuttal, not a defence, just stillness. Because the MP hadn't just critiqued a party leader, he had pulled the curtain back on a political machine, one that once promised fairness and now delivered managed decline. No one looked away, because they weren't just hearing an argument, they were watching the truth catch up with a man who built his rise on carefully controlled words. And now, none of them worked. The MP then revealed the quiet truth few dared to speak. Inside today's Labour Party, fear rules. MPs weren't silent because they agreed. They were silent because they were scared of punishment, of deselection, of being cast out for speaking up. He spoke of activists expelled, debates shut down, even long-serving MPs like Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn sidelined, not for wrongdoing, but for refusing to fall in line. This wasn't democracy, it was control. Labour wasn't just cleaning house, it was erasing its roots. And what was left? A leadership team obsessed with optics, terrified of resistance, and loyal only to power. The MP didn't stop with the internal culture, he went further. He described a systematic purge, members suspended for tweets, local branches starved of funding, conference debates banned, not to build unity, but to crush dissent. He laid out the contrast. Grassroots socialists expelled without process, while corporate donors and private health lobbyists were welcomed with open arms. This wasn't just hypocrisy, it was transformation. Labour, once a movement for the many, had been reshaped into a brand for the few, safe for elites, sanitised for investors, and stripped of its soul. And at the centre of it all was Starmer, not as a reformer, but as the architect. Then came the most damning revelations. What the public never sees. The MP pointed to secret meetings with arms dealers, private dinners with financial moguls, quiet assurances to foreign powers. None of it declared proudly, all of it shaping Labour's direction in the shadows. He wasn't speculating, he was naming sources, referencing documents, tracking the money. And with every word, Starmer's image as a principled leader unravelled further. Because this wasn't a party fighting for change, it was one safeguarding the status quo. The same deals, the same power brokers, just in red ties instead of blue ones. As the MP spoke, a quiet voice emerged from the backbenches. He's saying what we're all thinking. It was barely audible, but it shifted the mood. Suddenly the room wasn't just listening, it was agreeing, not openly, but inwardly, because the MP had said aloud what many felt but feared to express. The censorship, the corporate takeover, the fear of speaking out, all of it was real. And the most frightening part? Starmer hadn't denied a word, because deep down, even he knew. The mask had slipped, and the truth was out. The MP turned back to the heart of the issue, Labour's identity crisis. This wasn't a party of ideas anymore. It was a party of clones, safe, scripted, silent. MPs too afraid to represent their constituents unless it was pre-approved by the leadership. He described a machine built to avoid risk, not challenge injustice, to comfort donors, not defend the voiceless. And at the centre stood a leader who didn't want change, just control. Labour hadn't become an alternative to the Tories, it had become a polished replica, designed to calm the establishment, not confront it. The MP's final blows landed with precision. Labour, he said, hadn't just drifted from its roots. It had been rebuilt from the inside out to serve the same elites it once challenged. Oil giants, arms dealers, financiers. The very forces that hollowed out Britain now had a second home in Starmer's Labour. This wasn't about modernising. It was about surrendering. Starmer didn't just inherit a broken system. He made peace with it, protected it, branded it with a red logo and called it change. But the people watching knew better. Because what was once a party of hope now looked more like a fortress of power. The MP shifted focus to the one force still capable of changing everything. the people. He spoke not to Starmer now, but to the public, to those who had been ignored, lied to and left behind. He reminded them that Labour's betrayal wasn't just political, it was personal. But in that betrayal he saw something rising, a hunger, a quiet resistance, ready to grow loud. People weren't waiting for permission anymore. They were organising, demanding, refusing to be fooled again. The real Labour, the one built by and for working people, wasn't dead. It was waking up, and Starmer, he was no longer its leader. The MP's voice grew louder, firmer. This wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. He told the House that the British people were done waiting, done hoping that someone at the top would save them. The revolution they needed wouldn't come from Parliament. It would come from the ground up. No more loyalty to parties that forget them. No more patience for leaders who trade justice for headlines. The tide was turning, and it wouldn't wait for Keir Starmer to catch up, because the people were already moving, and they weren't looking back. The MP closed with a simple truth. Starmer had his chance, and he wasted it. He wasn't the saviour many hoped for. He wasn't the leader Labour needed. He was just another face of a system that thrives on broken promises and polished emptiness. But outside the chamber, something different was taking shape. People were building their own future, one rooted in fairness, courage and truth. And in that future, Starmer wouldn't lead. He'd be a footnote. Because the movement rising now isn't asking for permission, it's reclaiming power. As the MP stepped back, the chamber was gripped by silence. Not out of respect for procedure, but because something real had been said. Something undeniable. Keir Starmer sat frozen, not challenged, not debated, exposed. This wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about truth versus performance, people versus power. And as the MP's final words echoed across Parliament, one thing was clear. The battle for Britain's future had already begun. Not in party meetings or press briefings, but in the hearts of ordinary people who were done being ignored. The silence broke, and a new fight had just taken its place. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please like and subscribe to the channel for more updates like this.